One thing I wanted to start with when we're talking about the inner critic, and that's our theme right now, is that conditioning plays a big role in this. And it might be the conditioning of hearing words and having certain experiences that are traumatic. It also might be the experience of having really positive connection, like in this picture. That baby and the mother are sharing such a touching look of love and delight and connection. And so conditioning is positive and negative, and our beliefs are formed based on our experiences. And sometimes that's really positive, sometimes it's really negative. We form negative beliefs. That's very common, certainly in our culture. But that our conditioning and our beliefs happens in our animal body, our primitive brain and our nervous system operates largely below our awareness. And then as we tune in and we start becoming aware of it, we're often quite shocked at what's there. So the effect of trauma is that we turn against ourselves. That's something that I first really tuned into with Gabor Mate, and it's become really common knowledge the last few years. Some of these beliefs that we have are conditioned to believe is, and some we've already talked to here, is I don't deserve to be happy. There's something wrong with me. I should have done it a different way. I shouldn't have. It's my fault. There's something wrong with me. And the inner critic might be, relatively benign and just kind of coming in and saying, "Are you sure you tried hard enough there?" Or something a little bit less than contempt. But it's also very common for this voice to be really harsh and really judgmental. So some of these beliefs really weigh us down, as we can see in that cartoon, and it really feels true. I think a lot of the tightness in our back and neck and shoulders is that weight of the beliefs and expectations and missed opportunities, and I didn't do that well enough, and these beliefs that can be quite subtle. And sometimes we have that voice in our head of we can kind of hear it in our mother's tone of voice or our father's, but we take that over. So we don't actually have to be around them in order to still have these things kind of happening. So let's pause here for a minute and look into this. Why is that voice so often nasty? So if we were to look at the motivation, so the fear of being rejected, the fear of being an outsider is still pretty powerful for adults, but certainly it is for children. And we've talked many times about how shame really shuts us down. And the purpose of shame, in evolution is to keep us in the tribe so that we survive. And certainly children need to be protected and fed and housed. And we also need that emotional connection, that feeling like we're worthy. And so there's a couple of components here I think that maybe we could just stop for a couple of minutes and kind of sit with for you. There does seem to be a belief that if we attack ourselves first, or if we never go out into the arena and we never get engaged, then we're not going to be hurt. So that's part of it. What's the motivation for your inner critic? Just sit with that for a moment. See what's coming up in your body as well as the thoughts in your mind. And maybe recall a certain instance of when is it more active? What kinds of things does it say? What's the tone of voice? And we could ask ourselves that question too. Why are you so nasty? If it is, if that's your experience. Why do you use such a cutting tone, or why is there so much contempt here? Why are you so nasty? And just see what comes up. Notice if there's an energy of that in your body. A certain part of your body feels something different than it felt a few minutes ago. Tight, contracted, something like that is common. And see if you could welcome it. See if you could just allow it to be here for another minute or so. So, one thing that we know is that contempt really damages our relationship. And our inner critic can destroy our relationship with ourselves if we have a contemptuous, nasty inner critic. So, I think it's helpful just to acknowledge the effect. If we have a contemptuous, nasty voice in our head, that's really devastating. And we need to do something, probably a variety of things, to kick them out of our head or to reduce the amount of damage or to get them to, we need to change our relationship with them. So the nastiness, the contempt part, I think is very helpful to work with quite strongly and to try and partly to try and mitigate the damage that we have when we have that kind of self-talk, but also because there is a value in what's going on, or there can be, and how can we work with that? And one of the ways is to try and reduce the contemptuous tone. This toxic self-talk really grinds us down and it reinforces the core deficiency beliefs. So these beliefs of I'm no good, I'm selfish, there's something really inherently wrong with me are core deficiency beliefs that are come through conditioning and through our experiences in childhood. And becoming aware of the talk in our mind is something we need to do before we can change it. So we often have these internal environments of pressure and sometimes external pressure. Other people are pressuring us to do things or to be a certain way or to look a certain way, to feel a certain way, to live our lives a certain way. But also, then we also have that internal pressure of I'm not good enough if I don't perform really well, or I need to live up to my parents' expectations or my expectations. There's something wrong with me. And cultivating kindness for ourselves is really, really a foundational step for turning this whole relationship around. It's both helpful for seeing and work in healing with the core deficiency beliefs, but also this negative self-talk as well. So again, let's take a few minutes and pause here. So we don't want to get rid of a part of ourselves. We don't want to suppress a part of ourselves. On the other hand, we don't want to have something that's really dysfunctional kind of take over either. So if I look at it as my relationship with myself compared to my relationship with someone else, I wouldn't have a friend. I wouldn't stick around to be in a friendship with somebody who talked to me in a shaming way or who criticized me all the time. And so, if we could invite our inner critic to have a more respectful relationship with ourselves, and these are some of the things we might say: I'm happy to listen to you, but you don't get to shame me. I can't act in my own best interest when you use that contemptuous tone of voice. And so, we can do that welcoming. So, let's take it a couple of minutes here. And you might use some of the words on the screen or just close your eyes and kind of tune into it. What is it that part of you would like you to know? If you were really listening, what would it like you to know? And could it do that in a way that's not harmful to you? Stay in touch with your breath. If you need to do some tapping, if something gets kind of intense, use the tools tapping, tracing, change focus. And you might pick a specific example. What do you want me to know? What were you trying to tell me when you said you're a loser? What was it you wanted me to know from that? What was the danger? What were you trying to accomplish? And that might be something that you would want to kind of set aside to work with more. These inquiries are pretty fast, I know, in the group here. But if something kind of big came up for you there, make a note of that and you could come back to that anytime. So this inner nurturing committee is a idea from Dr. Rick Hansen around who could you invite to support you and be on your own side. And I wanted to bring it in here because the inner critic is so hard to work with. If you could have a group of people on your side, and it might be, your own wiser self, it could be an elder, a grandparent, a friend, teacher, a spiritual guide. There's a whole bunch of different ways that this can happen. Certainly therapists can be that support for us, at least at the beginning. Sometimes it's an animal. So if you were to just stop for a moment and think, well, what could an inner nurturing committee do? So you could visualize yourself sitting down and talking with them, for instance. You could have all of them together, or you could have one at a time. But that could be a perspective that you might have in real life, or you might have in a just kind of in a more imaginary way of if my grandma here was still here, who really loved me and wanted the best for me, what would she say? How would she contribute to this conversation about whatever it is that the inner critic is trying to get me to see? And could I use that in part to balance the critic? Could I have an inner nurturer who would really support me? Not in a Disney kind of a way, but in a real way. And this is something, especially if it's an elder in our family, if we had anyone in our family who was really kind of on our side or who we connected with, or an elder might not be in our family, but to help us get a different kind of perspective. And so, one of the ways we can do this is our own perspective, using our own conscious mind, the education that we've done around trauma. And so, when we look at this, is really specific now to someone who was in your life when you were a child and who terrorized you in some way, who berated you or criticized you or made you feel like you were never quite good enough. And knowing about intergenerational trauma and knowing maybe a little bit about their life, what was their motivation? What's your sense of that now? A lot of parents say that they ask where that final 3% was when you bring home a 97% on an exam. They would say, well, I'm trying to get you to do better. And so, was that actually for something that was for your own good, or was it from their own unhealed trauma? I don't have to look very many years back in the past to see how emotionally immature and unstable I was at times. And so, some of the things that I was trying to encourage might not have had a foundation of wisdom. I think that's quite common with people. So, what were their motivations as you see them now? And that way that they approached it, the contempt, was that actually helpful? Did it help? Did it shut you down? Was it effective? And maybe it was effective in one way. It made you try harder, but it made you feel so bad about yourself. So let's take a couple minutes just to sit with that. And if they had a motive of being a proud parent of someone who has a graduate degree and didn't really seem to care if you were happy with that or not, then that might be information that would be helpful to know too. Maybe their motives were different than yours. Maybe it had nothing to do with you. They were just too traumatized to parent well, and you bore the brunt of that because you were there. Stay in touch with your breath, your body, your feet on the floor. One of the inquiries that we use in the Kilby inquiries is a utility inquiry, where we look to see what is the usefulness of it. So we soak up the beliefs and expectations of our parents, partly because then we're in sync with them, we're in alignment, and we're included in that family unit. If we go too far against what the family believes, then generally speaking, going to have trouble. So we have the need for control of our environment, which children have very little control. And for safety, again, the safety that we have or relative unsafety as a child is usually dependent on the adults. And we have a need for approval as well. And so if we kind of position this inner critic in terms of why is the inner critic here, which we looked at a moment ago. So what's the main driver for the inner critic? And is it actually helpful now? And what would happen if you were to let it go? How would you protect yourself? How would you drive yourself to succeed or be productive or all of those other things if you didn't have that inner critic? What if you were to just let it go? Is there another way that you could still feel safe and included? Is it actually helpful for that? Something that was very helpful and essential actually as a child to help us cope with whatever was going on, whether it was emotional neglect or some kind of abuse, may not be necessary at all now. What's your sense of that? And again, this is a utility inquiry that we could spend a lot of time with, really looking at all the different angles. So, whatever comes up as you're looking at it now, you might want to follow up with that too. So, as you're listening to these sentences, just kind of close your eyes and see where they land. I let myself, 100%, I let myself off the hook. So, I let myself off the hook for things that happened when I was a child, for beliefs that I formed, the conditioning I had when I was a child. Really acknowledge I didn't set it up, I wasn't the adult, and there was nothing that I could have done to change things. I let myself off the hook. You could bring your hand to your heart if you wanted to. Offer yourself your own kindness and compassion. And this might be aspirational. There might be part of you, we could use this as a reverse inquiry. There might be part of you that's like, no, if I do, then. So we could look at that as well. Let's go into the inquiry. So we have conditioned beliefs. If we put those beliefs over in this space on the outside of our body on the left side, if it's a critical parent, if it's the inner critic, however you might hear that or visualize that, the words that they're saying, we have these conditioned beliefs like we need to drive ourselves to protect ourselves, productive. And we might have beliefs of, I don't deserve happiness, all kinds of things. See if you could put those all over on the left side of you. And then on the right side, what would be on the right side, that freedom, the emptiness, if you didn't have an inner critic, if you didn't believe those things? What would be on that side? And if you have that kind of, if you can feel the difference energetically, you have that kind of swampy, smelly group of ideas and beliefs, experiences on the left side. You might be able to feel the energy of that even. What does it feel like on the right side? If I had completely let go of all of that, what's your experience without that? And then let's do a couple of inquiries. So you might have something coming to mind. The reverse inquiry is so powerful. So if you wanted to use any of these words, one is, I am safe without the inner critic. And that really gets to, why is it here? Because nothing is here without a reason. So I'm safe without the inner critic. And then just see what comes up. See where the no is. Or maybe to look at it really directly. Contempt doesn't bother me. I don't mind if someone's nasty to me. I can feel that pressure in my chest, even just saying that. That might be something to work with. Or something like, I've completely let go of my negative conditioned beliefs. And as you sit with that, you might notice, well, there is this one. So let's take a few minutes to sit with whichever one of those or a different one that you might want to work with. Really feel it. Notice if it's thoughts. Stay really in your body, feet on the floor, breath. And notice if your mind is settled, if there's a lot of turmoil going on. And there most likely are things that you're going to want to follow up on. Let's give it a couple of minutes here to sit with whatever it is you're working with. What has some juice? And then bring that to somewhat of a conclusion. Let's go back to the slide about the inner nurturing committee. If you could work with this in a way where you had some support, let's take a minute to kind of sit with that. What would this inquiry look like? What would they say? Whoever it is that we might bring in. Would they hold your feet to the fire? Would they encourage you to see it with more a different perspective? How might they help? And then come back